goes to 3? Okay, I'll go to 3. All right, I'll get started. Well, thanks for joining me. My name is Ron Kuriscak. If you look at the schedule, you're here to talk. We're going to talk about security basics that get forgotten. I appreciate you coming. This is my second time speaking at SecretCon. What I'll usually do is I'll talk one year, pivot, and listen the next, and then talk the third. So this is my third year. Appreciate you coming to my presentation. I think this is a leadership track. I've been in this industry 20 plus years. I've been a CISO for some companies you probably heard of, some that you haven't. Cut my teeth the first day as a CISO for a financial services company responding to the 11th largest data breach. So got to learn a lot and what not to do. We're going to talk a lot about what security basics organizations are kind of dealing with, what they should be spending their time on, and not those shiny new tools, because foundational security is important. So I'm going to do a little bit of an intro, hopefully kind of keep it a little bit of historical context, and talk about the list. If anybody wants this presentation, certainly reach out to me and I'll give it to you. And then I've got an interesting tidbit at the end. All right, so let's start with, anybody know who these individuals are? We'll get right into it. Anybody have an idea? If you went to Secure 360, you might remember. This is a group of spies that were classified to Russia as Russian illegals. This is from 2010. The FBI spent 10 years collecting a dossier on each of these individuals. All of them are trained KGB agents who had been in the United States for a period of time, which are known as the Russian illegals. Does anybody know what the Russian illegals are? Anybody heard of the Russian illegals? Maybe you ever see this show? The Americans is based very similarly on what the Americans are. They're basically usually couples who take a dead person's persona. They go into the field, they get trained as that person. There's a couple that was called the Rileys. One was they're supposed to be from Toronto. They moved to the United States. Both were dead individuals who had social security numbers that the Russian KGB was able to take back in the 1960s and 70s. It was pretty easy to get a unauthorized birth certificate, so that's what the Russians did. And they were able to get backgrounds for these individuals. They had 2 kids that did not even know that their parents were Russian spies. And the show does a really good job of kind of bringing that to light. Now, I learned about it. I bought this book a number of years ago. It's the Matrokin Files. If anybody here read the Matrokin Files, fascinating read. Matrokin was the archivist for the KGB. And I think in the early 1990s, he was tasked to move the archives from one area to another, and he took personal notes. He started by looking at Stalin's file and trying to figure out who Joseph Stalin was. His file was blank. There was no information on him. They tried to expel all the information that the Russians had on what city he came from, what his parents did. He wrote his own history afterwards, so that we have an inaccurate current history of who Joseph Stalin and his family was. So he thought it was interesting. He started writing it down on pieces of paper, snuck it in his pants, went to his home, collect a bunch of information on what the Russians were doing, or the KGB was doing against, most world organizations, or not only countries but organizations who they've targeted. And in it, he identified this group called the Russian illegals. Now, the Russian illegals were started back in the early 1920s when Lenin came into power and the Bolsheviks. A guy named Felix Dzerzhinsky, he was a Polish-Ukrainian. That's kind of a consistent thing you'll see with the Russian KGB. They take a lot of Polish Ukrainians, train them not in soil that is Russian, so that they'll never know what it looks like to be in a Russian headquarters or how the Russian military or KGB operates. They train them outside and they put them into countries. And what they were targeting is not the United States. The United States was not even on the radar. The United States, it wasn't until FDR kind of classified them as a country, because a lot of Germany, the UK, and France did not recognize the Bolshevik presidency as a legitimate organization, so they did not look at them as a country, did not have delegates, did not have places within their major cities so they can go to and have people who worked within the country They had targeted Germany because Germany was the place where Lenin wanted the Soviet socialism to take off. It didn't happen. It ended up happening in Russia. So they created this program. The Cheka was the first secret police that the Russians had, and they targeted the UK because everybody wanted to be the UK in the early 1920s, France and Germany, and they put these individuals who would build their backgrounds at universities all across the world, build a dossier for 10 to 15 years, and then they plant them within the country, and then they would operate. Kind of a very interesting dynamic. So it builds a background of legitimate individuals who are scientists, they work within industry, and then they come to the United States trained as spies. I don't know if anybody here is old enough to remember that, but when I was younger in the 1980s, there were caches of weapons that would be found in parks all across the United States. Yes, I see a head shaking. Those are Russian illegals who would stockpile weapons within public parks. So if the communication came, they would mobilize and do whatever they were going to cause inside the United States, cause havoc, harm, chaos. So that's kind of the model that he built, and it did happen quickly across the world. Now in the United States, this was not my first presentation, but I was reading a couple books on this, and it's pretty fascinating to me. I grew up, my dad worked for a company called Bell Helicopter. They made the Huey helicopters in Vietnam. They have a bunch of helicopters. The TV show Airwolf is based on one of the Bell aircraft. I remember going as a kid to a lot of the engineering picnics and seeing things like the surface to land landing craft as a 10-year-old. I thought it was pretty cool. Jet engine blowing straight down across the land and seeing the Thunderbirds and all that was pretty cool. But the Russians had implanted this guy named Stanislav Shumansky. He went to college at MIT. Now, he was trained as a spy prior to coming to MIT, but finished with a master's degree. And then decided, hey, I'm going to go into the aeronautical business and start stealing secrets. The Russians were far behind us in military technology. They did not have a B-29 Superfortress. Their military planes in World War II were not even to par with the Luftwaffe. So they needed any information that they can. And this guy came to the United States in 1931 before the war, World War II, and was able to work for every single major aircraft manufacturer in the United States. I had no idea this guy even existed. And so how he was found out was how most incidents are found within organizations. Was it like a SOC or SIM that found it and said, hey, this guy's a bad guy? No, it wasn't until his book was published that we knew this guy even was a spy for the Russians. And even the illegal program was not found until this book was published. So this guy was able to work for every major aerospace manufacturer in the United States, stole a bunch of stuff, would have these big soirees in LA and invite a bunch of executives, wine and dine them, get in good graces, and then for about 15 years, he would just steal and send everything back to Russia. And it did have an impact because they were able to build a competitor to the B-29 that they would not have been able to do, and it still happens today. So when you hear about these things about the Russian illegals, it's not a new concept. This happened in the 1920s. I think every country in the world's probably learned from this, and they are targeting U.S. organizations on an ongoing basis. So as a security professional, unfortunately, we don't get in front of these things a lot of times. It's usually when a customer or a partner calls us and said, hey, there's some malicious activity happening. So making sure that we have good security programs that identify what good is, what bad is, what malicious activity is important. And that'll get us into what the basics are. For 25 years, and it's funny, when I go into organizations and we start talking about the program at a very high level, things like, tell me about your security vulnerability management program. Tell me about your penetration testing program. A lot of these organizations have very not mature programs. They're still kind of building them out. They're spending all their time on AI when they don't even have vulnerability management, or they're not even doing multi-factor. No, I don't want anybody to raise their hands, but who here doesn't have multi-factor turned on at your company? I hope everybody does, because the DOJ didn't. They recently just had a breach in which somebody was able to break in on single-factor authentication with a single-factor password. And it's embarrassing when we run pen tests for the companies I work for, because I'm not a pen tester anymore. I haven't done that for a long, long time. But when you run pen testing within an organization, you find things like multi-factor. It should be turned on. If you're not doing the basics, what everybody else is doing, you're 5 to 10 years behind. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, because I hear this all the time. Well, we're getting to it. We're going to get to it. We spent 6 to 5 years trying to roll on MFA or encryption or whatever the heck technology it is, and they really struggle with it. So I think instead of organizations spending all this time on AI and quantum computing, let's step back and do the basics, because the bad guys are just looking for an easy way in, and if we're not doing the basics well, they're going to target us and continue to break our security programs. And I don't want another letter in the mail. Everybody here probably has a letter from a data breach of some type. It's kind of embarrassing, and two, it's insulting to say you've got to send me a letter to say that your data's been breached, and it's not their fault that the security's been broken and now your confidential data has been broken. So the challenges I always hear is that it costs too much, it's too complicated, I have limited resources. Anybody here have like enough resources to deploy the technology that they have? And I see a lot of head shaking saying no. That's why partners are really good. My first day as a CISO dealing with that data breach, I remember asking the question is, who do we have a retainer with to help with response, to help with investigations, to help with whatever it was, to fill in the gap on technology? We had nobody. Well, we were a government subcontractor that was supposed to be 853 compliant. We were not. We had the FBI. I mean, I was interviewed by the FBI before I even knew where the bathrooms were. And it's kind of funny when you kind of sit down with the FBI in the middle of a breach and they're like, you had to know this was going to happen. I mean, I remember telling the FBI agent, I've only been here 3 hours. I don't even know where the cafeteria is. So you're raking me over the coals about the controls, and we did some really dumb things. Things like having PII on DVDs that were unencrypted. Now, there was a reason, wasn't a great reason. If I were an auditor or an OCR investigator, which they would ask me that question, why was the data left unencrypted? Good question. There was there was a business justification. Once we went into the CFO's office, the reason that we had it structured that way is that the Department of Ed would want to check on borrowers quickly. So, and nobody wanted to go into a locker room with the key, because the key was managed. Then you had to go into a safe, know the combination, pull the data, lock everything up, register that you took the information. Nobody wanted to. So that was day one. We had all these controls in place. And then 5 years, 6 years, 10 years later, nobody wanted to do it. So what did we do? We left the key on a hook outside the door. It was wide open. It was propped open. Combinations were there. It was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was comical. So when the FBI came through and said, why was it done this way? There was a business justification, and the Department of Ed paid us a lot of money to do it, but it wasn't the right thing to do. So we really need to step back and look at the controls that were in place. We didn't really have anybody at the time to do it, but it does make things more difficult for individuals to break in and steal things. Like the onus of that theft was basically cash. We had this was during the first recession. We had renovated an office building, spent a lot of cash with contractors, and somebody thought these safes had cash in them. So they took the safes, actually broke into them within 24 hours. Minneapolis police did not know that those safes were ours. Now, these safes were beat the heck. The doors were ripped off. They were dragged behind cars. They used welding devices. They used drills to get into them. They didn't even have, you couldn't even tell it was a safe at the end, but at the end of the day, Minneapolis police took pictures and showed us that the contents were taken out of the safe. They were DVDs stuffed into a black bag, like that you see on TV for cash, because there is a reason why they use black bags like that. It's to distribute cash. But they figured out what they had and just threw it away next to the broken into safes. So they didn't know what they had. The FBI did a bunch of investigation, found out that they didn't know what they had, so they didn't take the 550 and take PII off them and go out and buy credit cards or get credit cards for other individuals. And in that case, we learned a lot what not to do, what to do. Now, why do the bad guys wait about 2 years before they start using your stolen information? But you have an idea? I learned this from the FBI. They said that basically 2 years is as long as credit monitoring happens. So once 2 years passes, they figure no one's looking at this stuff. I'll have free reign for as long as I can use it. And so if you've got a data breach and something turns off after 2 years, I'd highly recommend at least keep it on for another 6 months. You never know. Bad guys know what the method of operation is. So making sure you have those good controls, reduction of risk, quicker time to detection. Nothing's going to be perfect. So you got to make sure you have basics that make sure that you're addressing the issue, especially to the board, that it's only a matter of time, and we are going to put controls in place. One, to reduce or enhance the time to detection, reduce the time to response, and making sure that we address legal and liability issues. The other problem that I see in many organizations is that we don't know what the disclosure or notice period is with our partners. So when I enter, everybody here probably works for their own business or a business. Anybody here work for the military? This is a little bit, or the U.S. government? We got a couple in the back. You don't have to worry about this because they've already taken care of this with the DOJ. But when you enter into an agreement, a lot of the legal stipulations are breach notification. Now, what are most breach notification requirements in contracts today? What's the average? 72 hours about? Well, if you work for the federal government, it's 1 hour. When I was a CISO for financial services companies that had government contracts, I had to pre-register, and you don't register in the middle of a breach. I highly recommend doing it before. If you do, you're going to make a mistake. The Department of Justice, the DOD, if you're doing government contracting with the DOD, there's a higher standard. They don't set you up within an hour. I can guarantee you that. So do it as soon as you recognize you have the relationship. Go to your contract orders and figure out who you need to contact. But go through the pre-registration process, because when a breach happens, you've got to tell them within a set period of time. And a lot of organizations do not know what their legal disclosure or notice period is, and that could be a breach of a contract. So if you're a DOD subcontractor with a $40 billion contract and something happens, they can take it away. And when the government comes in and takes a contract away, they slap you on the hands. What's the residual damage? Is it 1 year, 2 years? They can put you in the penalty box for 3 to 5, depending on what they see as your security capabilities within the program. So making sure that you do your diligence will address the forgotten basics. And these basics are what every single organization should be doing, but are not. And I would say it's the starting point. If you're new to a company, you transition to a company, and you're the CISO, a security architect, ask these questions. What are we doing from a regulatory perspective? What are we doing from, and I've got the list here in a minute, but what are we doing from the basics? Making sure you address the basics before you're going out and spending money on AI, which most companies don't even know what to do with AI yet. They're going to do something with it, but they don't know how to even use it yet. So my recommendation is if you want this list, let me know. I had a hard time of kind of bringing it down to these 7, 8. I feel like I've been doing this a long time. There's a lot of other things, and I have a second list after this that will address a couple other things that I think organizations should be looking at as well. So asset management, I did it alphabetically, but I think this is one of the most unsexy areas that organizations have to address in security. If you don't know what you have, how do you know you have to protect it? In many companies where I've been the CISO, I remember I would ask, hey, we have laptops, what kind of information's on it? I don't know. Are they all encrypted? I think so. Having reports and KPIs and metrics, everybody can do things better, but knowing what your assets are critical to making sure you put controls in place to protect them. Knowing what's on them, are they encrypted? Do you have to disclose if you're in healthcare? We want to stay away from using the term breach. We want to use like event, because as soon as you say breach, you've got to now disclose. It's a HIPAA violation. It's got to go to the OCR. I don't know why the OCR does these investigations, but I worked for the state of Minnesota a long time ago, and I was part of the organization that had the second HIPAA audit. And anybody here do HIPAA audits? I'd love to talk to you afterwards, by the way. They're done hopefully a lot better, but we were provided notice for Health and Human Services via Gmail account. We had an attorney from the OCR send us notice. Now, that's my fault. I saw it and put it in my spam saying it's just a phishing attack. But when the guy showed up about 2 months later and showed up at our office and said, I'm doing a HIPAA audit, I'm like, I don't know who you are. I don't know what's going on. Hopefully they don't provide notice via Gmail accounts anymore. And they're not just attorneys, because I think they're only looking at specific pieces. So when an attorney comes and does a HIPAA audit, what are they looking at? Any technology? No, they're looking at the legal verbiage and the terminology. Now what I understand is there's multiple teams that will come on site. The look back period too, I have to say, is it used to be about 6 months. Now it's at least a year to 2. So if you find not doing your security and you're under discovery where the attorneys are trying to figure out what was disclosed, what you should have been doing, the look back period's about 1 to 2 years. And what are they looking for? Negligence. Why would you go to negligence? Because the costs go through the roof. And in law, there's something called a joinder case, which is like under 12 cases, and then when you go above, that's like a class action lawsuit. Where's the money? 12 cases or like 200? They're all trying to get to these 200 plus class action lawsuits so they can get the best return on investment. So making sure you address, what you have, how the data traverses your organization. You will learn a lot about how your organization works if you find out how the assets are stored and then traverse. And one thing here I haven't said yet is that this is a list that humans, especially from a security perspective, need to address. But we all make mistakes. We're all human. My wife tells me I'm making mistakes every single day. I try to learn from those and not do them again, but I can't say I'm perfect. In the security sense, if you're going to do the same thing over and over, you're opening yourself up for a large data breach. And in some cases, you've got to put controls in place to make sure humans who make mistakes, that the tools and technology that can do it will actually protect you from it. And I'll use an example. That breach I was talking about back in 2010, we were pretty punitive. We didn't know what was going on. We knew that there were bad actors who had known our operation. When we looked at the facility, we had moved in and we had bought a upgraded security package in which we outsourced security operations from a physical security perspective to the landlord. When the breach happened, we didn't have any evidence. We had one camera that had a picture of a white pickup truck that left our, it was through the gym, left our parking lot at about 3:30 in the morning on that Saturday. So we think that's when it happened. There really wasn't any evidence. We didn't have fobs or multi-factor at the doors, so we didn't know. Doors were propped open, left open. We had no idea. All the cameras were turned to the wall. So somebody had come in and turned all the cameras inward, and we had no idea. Nobody had looked. It was either recent or it might have been months before, but we just didn't know. So we were pretty nervous. We had to send something like $500 million in a transfer to the federal government. Within every quarter we were doing that on student loan collections. We were terrified. We had no idea if there was a disgruntled insider, was there another perpetrator. So we sat down with the security team. I worked with a CIO. I won't say I worked for him because I actually worked with the CEO. I worked for a CIO who thought 2 DLPs are better than 1. Even though they did the exact same thing. I'm more of a realist to say, we don't need 2 of the same thing. Let's have something different. So defense in depth is a very good concept, but he wasn't going that route. He wanted to spend money like cash. So I said, let's think about encryption. If we're going to send data externally, can we put controls in place to say, if I forget to put encrypt in the subject, because that's how the technology worked back then, at least the vendor that we chose, and you don't put encrypt in the subject, it doesn't encrypt it. Well, I'm a human, I'm working fast. We had collectors who, they're working 12-hour days. We had servicers that were doing the same thing. We all make mistakes. Let's put a control in place. They kind of thought I was a little crazy for that, but okay. It was Christmas Eve, I'm at my son's hockey game. I get a call from a director in California who said, Ron, I made a mistake. I sent a record with 10 million PII records to a third party and forgot to hit encrypt. Okay, I don't want to get fired. She was crying, she was in tears. She was having a really bad day, and it's Christmas Eve. I said, hold on a second. Let me just answer a question. I'll get back to you. Just stay by your phone. So I called our director of operations and said, hey, can you verify that this email was encrypted? He looked at it. Yep, it had PI on it. It was an attachment. The whole thing was encrypted. They had to come back to our server. If anybody was going to get it, they're going to have to log into a web server that was that had encryption, and then the file, if it was transferred, it would be encrypted as well. So I said, okay, thank you very much. And then I called that individual afterwards and said, I don't remember her name, Laura. Hey, that mistake you made, we were able to put a control in place to make sure that the mistake would not happen and your data was encrypted. You don't have to worry about it. Oh my God, thank you so much. So at the end of the day, we prevented these errors where an individual was moving very fast. Everybody makes mistakes when we go too fast. So she just needed to take a deep breath. She's trying to get home for Christmas Eve. I don't fault her for that at all. But making sure how the data traverses, that aligns you to your business strategy to make sure that you're encrypting things for human mistakes that can happen all the time. So asset management is an area that most organizations really struggle with. I've only seen about a handful that do this well. Anybody want to raise their hand and say their organization has this locked down? Because I'd love to come talk to you. But there are a lot of controls that organizations should look to and say, I've got asset management from a data perspective, then also from the physical assets. How many devices do I have? How many are lost? How many are in someone else's hand? Making sure that you're doing asset management down to the data level, I think, is important and a basic that I think every company should be doing. Data backups from disaster recovery. I can't tell you how many times we've audited this or done tabletops. I hope everybody does tabletops. That's another thing. If you don't have a partner or a retainer with somebody, please go out and get one. So these are like the 3 things to do from this. If you remember anything from this talk, go and get a partner. Make sure you check your tape backups or your backups, your hot sites, making sure that your data is being backed up. Because a lot of times I see organizations who have issues with this and they have to restore because of a ransomware event and they can't do it. So making sure you have that. And then 3, make sure you have a SOC SIM that has a determined SLA. Because I've been a CISO for a number of companies. One thing I always do in my gap assessments is tell me what your SLA is. And when I hear what's an SLA, it kind of makes me mad. After 25 years, it's kind of infuriating. But the last 3 organizations that I was a CISO for, that's what I heard. I don't know what an SLA, we don't have one. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. So we don't know if they're doing tier 1 and tier 3 monitoring and how long they're supposed to get back to me. That's crazy. So we'll get to that in a little bit as well, but I think disaster recovery, making sure you do this. Everybody here, I hope, is doing testing on an ongoing basis. I see a couple heads. You don't know what you don't know until you test. Every single test I've been part of has value. They may be similar in manner, but I was a CISO for Cherokee Indian Nation down in North Carolina. They had 2 very severe hurricanes come through, I think it was end of last year, no, 2 years ago, Helene and Milton. We were a hospital. We had a hospital and we had banking, but hospital was our core facility. We had to make sure that those people didn't die. So we had tested our backups before I came on board, and I wanted to validate. Have we tested? Does the backup generator turn on? I mean, I don't know how many times we've tried that, and it'll spin up and then go right back down. Or guess what? Forgot to order diesel fuel. We haven't done that in a while. So little basic things to test. You always learn something. You learn about things that you may have missed. Highly recommend you do this on an ongoing basis. Don't wait until something bad happens. The thing that I hold pride for the team, it wasn't me, is that when Helene came through, it devastated Ashland, North Carolina. Like every hospital around us went down, but not us. And then when Milton came on, I was the CISO there, and we were terrified. People are still, I don't know if anybody's here from North Carolina, but that area of the country is still reeling. There's still people living in hotels almost 2 years later because the FEMA can't figure out how to fix their community. The second one came through Milton, and we did not go down either. We had to take patients from other hospitals to be able to treat them, some who are intensive care. But the team did a really good job of making sure that when something bad happens, we actually tested for it and made sure that we could respond to it. So making sure the executive team knows, and I would say there's a couple different ways to test disaster here. making sure that it's technical in nature, but then also doing a either separate one or doing a supplementary one that has executive leadership in it. And I always hear the pushback is like, my leadership team is not responsive. You learn a lot about a leadership team when they get put through a disaster. And if it's only a test, it builds muscle memory. They know what they're supposed to do. Whenever I sit down with organizations and we go through what an executive, an ELT, or a C-level tabletop looks like, there's always prep. You never do it and try to embarrass. I had a CIO friend of mine. I don't know if Dave's here, but a CIO friend of mine, he called me up a couple months ago and said, is a tabletop supposed to embarrass me as the CIO? And I said, no, absolutely not. Well, the partner that we used made me look like an idiot in front of the C-suite. I'm never using him again. So that's the way you can alienate yourself in an account or with a client pretty easily, is that making sure you do the right thing. It's never meant to embarrass anybody. It's meant to learn. What can we do better as an organization? Is our BIA up to date? Business impact analysis. Can we actually recover? I mean, the best companies I know are ones that actually take things down, turn power off, turn systems off, and actually test it more from a breach simulation perspective. And using technology like breach attack simulation tools, I think really helps the next level. So you're not doing the same thing. When I do an assessment or I try to do something different, every year it is meant to learn from what we have done in the past. Not a little bit about multi-factor authentication. If you're not doing this, please circle this and go back and turn it on, especially remotely. This is a standard operating procedure for every industry that I know of, except maybe the federal government. When I worked in 2010, I remember the feds came in and said, you got to have multi-factor turned on for everybody, on the land, remotely. I don't care who it is, third parties. You got to have MFA. So I went out to DC. I had to do those sessions in which you're being grilled by senators. I had to do that in a closed session. That was a lot of fun. No, it wasn't. Blumenthal went after me. I don't know what I said to him, but I think he's from New Hampshire or Vermont or Connecticut or somewhere. He came down about cybersecurity. I'm like, how does this guy even know this stuff? But he had a team that was very versed in what breach response is supposed to look like. So multi-factor, I remember going out to DC and I was getting grilled by senators, and then I met with our partners in the Department of Education and with the DOD. And I would walk in their office, and I was blown away that from the floor to the ceiling were RSA boxes of multi-factor devices that go on key rings. Remember those? We used to have those everywhere. They had not even deployed it. So instead of saying that they were the weakest link, they were saying we were. Like, no, you guys are the weakest link. You don't even have multi-factor, but yet you're auditing me against it. So making sure you turn it on, and it doesn't surprise me that the DOJ just had a breach tied to it. It's a basic thing that every organization should turn on. It's not simple. I have simple up here. That's what every company says, and that's what vendors will tell you. But once you actually deploy it, there are some strange applications that it has to. If you have legacy applications, you got to make sure it works for, but it can be very cost effective. As a person that goes in and does a gap assessment within an organization, I like to leverage the investments already made within an organization. So the ROI can be justified to some degree. So if you've got Okta, turn it on to multi-factor. A lot of those things are easy to turn on. You've got to test it. Make sure you test before you deploy. And I was a programmer out of college, and I remember the first dozen applications that I had to work the weekend, and sometimes 2, 3 in the morning. We're updating an application, we're testing it, but none of the business unit people were there with us. No, you guys go do it. I trust IT at 2:30 in the morning. It's because they didn't want to get up and do it. But make sure you test it. Improves compliance. It just makes it that much more difficult. If an attacker is going to go after an organization, usually they have a lot of time on their hands. They're either disgruntled or they don't like you. For some reason, it could be ideological. Hacktivists are still a big thing. In this day and age, I'm always surprised through mergers and acquisitions how many organizations are targeted. A local company here, I won't name them because you'll probably figure out who it was. They purchased a third party that did research and development on chickens. And for some reason, Anonymous did not, one branch of Anonymous or somebody in Anonymous did not like that. And so they went after this organization that just recently got acquired by this parent. The parent had all the money. And so once Anonymous got in, they got in, and everybody's network, at least the ones I've worked with, most are flat. So once you get in one place, you're kind of everywhere. And they got in and they just kind of went everywhere. And I'm sitting in the lobby with the CISO. I think it was like at 2:30 in the afternoon meeting. It's like 2:45, it's 3, and we're like, where the heck is this guy? We get a text notice, and then the person at the front desk said, yeah, there's been an incident. We don't know what, but all the systems are down. Can you guys come back tomorrow? Well, we got a call. We came back in 2 weeks. It took them 2 weeks to kind of turn the system on, and it was all multi-factor. If they would have just turned on multi-factor, the bad Anonymous, somebody in Anonymous would have kind of went somewhere else, and they would have not spent the effort to try to go up and cause harm, and they did. So multi-factor should be an easy one that organizations can turn on. Another one I hear or I see a lot is just limiting access to confidential data. Talking about data that's maybe protected, just make sure individuals know what they're not supposed to share, what they're not supposed to have on their desk. If you work in healthcare or in the DoD with NIST 853, we always did like spot checks. We call them audits, but we would walk around and see who had information lying like PHI or PII on their desktop or on their desk or in their folders or unlocked cabinets, because you just don't know who the cleaning people are. Now, there are a lot of famous cases about competitors hiring cleaning staff to go in and find dirt. Now, my favorite one is Oracle and Microsoft. Both of their CEOs, so Ellison and Gates, both hired a third-party cleaning agency and they spent 2 years doing this, which is hilarious. Getting any dirt that they could find on these two CEOs, on the opposite CEO, so they can acquire them or make them look bad. Can you imagine that? Like CEOs are trying to find dirt on others just to make them look bad? I guess it happens every day. But we would do these audits, and one of them, because I'm not going to make somebody do something I won't do. So if we're going to do them after hours, I was in all of them. I did them for 4 years at this company. I was always part of the team. We always had pizza after, something fun for the team who did it. And one time I stumbled upon this lady's desk. The computer was locked, but all of these papers were everywhere. And PII, Social Security numbers, a lot of confidential data. It looked like something she left in a hurry. And I don't know what happened, but I know I'm human, I make mistakes. So my team was like, oh my God, we're gonna fire somebody. And I said, no, that's not what we're here for. So the next day I had her come to my office and I said, let's talk about what happened last night. She goes, oh, I am so sorry. I got a call, my daughter was in a horrific car accident, I just left. She's okay now, but at the time I thought she may not made it. The sheriff on the call said that she may not make it. So she was in tears, she was emotional. I'm not going to write somebody up for that. I would do the exact same thing, knowing that my kid has been in a horrific car accident. So putting that context and understanding why people do certain things. Now we could put controls in place to say this is more digitized, but in this case, I wrote an exception. We're not going to write this person up because as a human, having empathy as a leader, that's one area that I see in leadership, especially in organizations, that is just a fallacy. They say it, but they're not actually empathetic. When push comes to shove, they just don't care. It's all about the bottom line. They're really not empathetic about what you're doing. You either, yes, you did something wrong, or you did something, there's no context. So to me, it's important to know why people do things and try to put controls in place. And if we make mistakes for reasons like my kid's about to die or in a car accident, that's okay. We have to be human in some cases. So having the data protected, making sure unauthorized access, the cost is usually minimal in these cases. Sometimes we put other controls in place. Giving somebody a safe really just costs a little bit. So to put additional controls in place to make sure people are doing the right thing, the return on investment is huge, and it actually really does help from a compliance and legal perspective. Software updates and some of my favorite meetings are patch management meetings. I love sitting down and talking with organizations, business unit leaders who, we can't patch that. One of my favorite, anybody here an Oracle developer? Love Oracle developers because they can't do anything. It has to be a certified patch. It has to go through all this quality control. It's going to cost us millions of dollars. I remember when I was a programmer, we deployed Oracle web application. It was like a market center. And I remember them saying, well, we can't patch it. So I dug deeper. They took an Apache server and put a module on it and sold it for like $3 million. And I'm like, this is egregious. Like, you guys didn't even build this thing. This is all open source, but okay. You got us over the barrel, and now we got to pay for it. So the DBAs are like, we need another 6 months. We can't meet the emergency cycle. So knowing what the policies are and holding individuals within your organization accountable, I think, is important. So here in a patch management meeting, it's like the policy is 30 days. If it's an emergency, 24 hours. Why can't you meet that? Do I need to get on the phone with Oracle? Yeah, please. Yeah, and Oracle just blew us off, so it's pretty funny. But yeah, we try so hard to put these controls in place, but your vendors sometimes can't meet them. And a lot of times, and I've been part of these like vendor relationships where the vendors will come in and they'll give you information prior to disclosing. That's awesome, because I can patch issues, and having a good relationship with your partner, I think, is important so that you can patch these things on an ongoing basis. You're not just contacting them when you need something new or you need to do a renewal. Staying close with your partners, I think, is important. Patch Tuesday, everybody knows what that looks like, but what does it look like within an organization? Making sure you have controls, and the other part I love talking to organizations is that when you have a policy, like say it's 30 days for patching, I still know some Fortune 100s that policies are optional. What? Policies are optional? So if somebody does something malicious, they have confidential data, they put it in their bag or they give it to a third party. Now, I've worked in organizations where, I use the example somebody encrypted something or forgot to. I've worked in, they sent it to a competitor because they're leaving to go work for them, or they took information to start their own business. That's unethical, that's wrong. In our industry and security, you got to be honest about what you're doing, but you can't steal things. So coming down on those individuals is easy. It's not fun, but you still have to hold them accountable. But knowing what the policies are, having a patch management process in place, knowing what the patch management process is. I mean, I just did a vulnerability assessment for a very large company, and I was talking to the business unit. I was like, well, we just put patches in when we want to. Do you guys know about the emergency process? We never use that, so we don't have to know about it. Never? Like, it's never come up in the 40 years you've been in practice? No, never. I find it hard to believe, but you still need to know what the patch, if you're in IT, you're in security, it can reduce your threat vector hugely if you just patch your systems. But most organizations struggle with it. They don't have the manpower to do it. They don't have the technology. Go out and find a partner to take this laborious patch process to actually do the remediation. Find somebody to be your trusted advisor and do it. If you can't do it, find somebody to do it. They could do it probably quicker, faster. If that's their core business, they're going to do it cheaper as well. I like this one where I still see guest networks not physically disconnected to the corporate network. You got to make sure that somebody can't just go into a sitting area and just hop into your network. Wireless assessments, I don't see them as often, but I still think that they're effective. I mean, I'm kind of aging myself when I talk about Best Buy and how people used to just sit in the parking lot, and then because they're all flat networks, you get into one register, you can go anywhere you want in their network. Making sure you're assessing against what these look like. Doing a physical walkthrough. Pen testing is another thing. I think it's on my second list here, but pen testing, everybody should be doing on an ongoing basis. Knowing what the attackers are seeing. Oh, I've never seen that before. Like, well, you should, because testing your network, testing your organization. I worked for a big manufacturer here, one of my first security jobs, and we would do site visits. We would tell the plant manager, we'd have a get out of jail card for free, but we kind of pen test the facility. I don't know how many times the doors propped open into an area where they're making Abram tanks or they're making like DoD systems. Anybody can walk in and steal something or take pictures. So making sure you have those things locked down is important. I think this is one of the areas where I think organizations just don't have their I's dotted. Third-party risk management. Out of all the breaches I've been part of in my career, third parties are usually the most notorious and the most consequential. I've known at least 6 CISOs who've been fired because their third-party risk management program is poor, or they buy a company and integrate without actually checking to see if that company's already been owned by North Korea or South Korea. And the one CISO, really good friend of mine still, he was the CISO of a big manufacturer. He gets a call from some business unit, and they're in Beijing at the time. This company in North Korea has our next-gen egg device already in production. We are in pre-production. How would they have, it looks exactly the same. How would they know? And when you do a pen test, you kind of get a good perspective. And I would say don't do the automated ones, because that doesn't get you as deep as you need to. Have someone skilled. Well, this one was not that difficult. Their mainframe was open, anonymous to anybody. I mean, if you're going to have your mainframe accessible to the internet for anybody, I'm sure North Korea didn't take them that long. I'm sure China had it too. So having good controls with third parties, knowing how they're connecting, having staff that manage that relationship. Same company, I remember we did it post-breach, we did a third-party assessment to see how many third parties did we actually have. So we kind of got together as a leadership team and said, I don't know, maybe 5,000. I mean, we're a pretty big company, we're Fortune 500. 80,000, we got to 60, and we're like, we're still going. We got to 80, we had to stop it. There were so many third-party connections through credit cards and plants and unauthorized things that were happening. It doesn't take much for somebody to enter into a relationship. And when those relationships are good, like say, for example, we outsource data management to this third party, and we're sending them documents to be converted to digital assets. And we don't know what kind of data. Maybe first we do public information. We're so good at it, after about 2 years, we're sending them confidential data, and they're sending it over to China or who knows where else. One of the use cases I use for this is I worked for the state of Minnesota, and we had healthcare information that we outsourced to this third party. We found out through an audit that they were sending it to save money, they were sending it to China to digitize and then sending it back. We did some research. MnDOT and Health and Human Services, and Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. Hopefully none of you are here, but all 4 of those agencies were doing the same thing we were. And what had happened was the third party we had like a 20-year relationship with. The first couple years were great. They did what they were supposed to. The owners kind of stepped aside, hired this guy that was going to save them a lot of money and downsize their costs, but increased profit. So what did? They outsourced it overseas. They had no idea. So any bridge that was in Minnesota, and this was right around the time the bridge collapsed, any individual that had services through Health and Human Services, all that information was in China, and no one knew it until we did this audit. So understanding how those third parties are getting better at consuming your data and having a program in place. I'm a big advocate. If you have a data classification policy and you're sending third parties your most critical data, go show up, do an audit. You can write into the contract, right to audit. Give them a 2-week notice. I've probably done 24 of those with my staff. There's not one I didn't find an inaccuracy of what the third party was doing. Oh, we had 24/7 guards. We're like, there's nobody here. We can't even get to the data center. Or the data center is a shared space it's got all our competitors are right next to us. No cages, our servers can be accessed. So make sure you audit these third parties to make sure they're doing what they say they're doing. Because if you're not managing them, find another that you can and hold them accountable. Vulnerability management, if you're not doing this, table stakes. I know it's a commodity type service, but everybody should be doing this and assessing their organization to make sure that they're just checking off the low-hanging fruit. It's really easy to run a tool. It's hard to actually make your business do something about it. So holding them accountable, having a CISO and a COO or a CFO as part of the team, that's where the security committee comes in place. Making sure they're all on the same page, they're all working together, they're all going to actually do something about making sure security is done right within the organization. Here's my added list. I added one, but I forgot. This is an older one, but I had access management here as well, because organizations should be doing annual reviews of who has access. I don't remember who I was talking to, but and they go back years later, they still have access. They should be termed right away when they're termed from the organization. SIM incident response, knowing what the battlefield is within your organization, knowing what assets, who's attacking your organization. This is an area where I really think third parties need to be held more accountable. I have been part of assessments that we've fired the third party because they're either not managing the house, they're not monitoring alerts. One local company, I remember, asked them, how many alerts do you get on an annual basis? This is a Fortune 500, 12 ingress egress points all over the globe. We get 3 alerts a year. 3 alerts? Yeah, just 3 alerts, like no incidents. We get 3 alerts. So I'm like, that doesn't make sense. So we ended up doing an additional audit. We found that the third party, who we ended up changing out because they weren't doing what they said they were doing, they just modified all the alerts to low because they didn't want to deal with them. That's not doing your job. Risk management, I still see organizations really struggle with risk management and tying changes. So this is where your leadership can get better at asking for money by tying it to risk and business justification. A lot of organizations just don't do a good job with risk management. So making sure you're stepping back, you have a program, you have a person that owns it, it gets reported up to the board. It's an important piece to qualify and get the tools and support and the necessary individuals, staff if you need it outsourced, to get and actually make the organization more secure. Pen testing has really evolved in the last couple of years. I would say you got to do 2 things. You got to do ongoing testing where you're testing all the time, and then also having somebody with the skill set at least 4 times a year, not once a year. I don't see companies doing it once, waiting until the one time a year to do it. They're doing it on an ongoing basis, and it's the skill set of the pen tester that can get deep or not as deep. Maybe you got controls in place. But having that individual aspect, and the individuals, the better they are, the more that they'll usually find. So making sure that you have it as part of your program is important. Insider threat, another emerging area where I think organizations want to have a program, but I don't know many companies that actually have a formal insider threat program. Highly recommend that you do that. Legislative compliance, still when I do NIST CSFs or NIST 853s or ISO assessments, usually one of the things I sit down with legal and say, tell me what are your compliance or regulatory compliance regs that you have to be compliant with? I don't know. Manufacturer I worked with, remember I asked them, said, you do government work? I know you do, because they had this facility that was surrounded, it was almost a moat. It had this massive fence, and it was farm fields all around it. It looked like a castle, and it was their DOD practice. I remember asking one of the CFO, C-level individuals, it might have been the CRO, so are you guys DFARS compliant? They're like, nah, that doesn't apply to us. You guys have the plans to a U.S. nuclear submarine. I think that's a military device. Just make sure. So go back. They went back and realized they were making their contract with the DoD was $80 billion, and nobody knew if they were DFARS compliant. They were, because if you have military systems, you are. So knowing what the compliance regs are is important. You can lose your contract, and it won't be 1 year, it'll be 3 to 5. Another one, I think organizations, and I should have put dark web, reputation and dark web monitoring is a really interesting one, where you can find a lot about what people perceive your company and who's attacking it. And the time duration of actually responding is very quick. I had a CISO friend of mine who we did a POV and said, hey, what's happening on the dark web? How are organizations, this entity, it was because they had some mining capabilities that were not positively reported to in the press. And we found that they had a couple active directories for sale for $500. For 5 years, they had their entire active directory was stolen, and it was for sale. And it was only like a year old, was the last one. So somebody inside is stealing information or has access. And so we had 30 minutes to pay for it. We actually weren't fast enough. Somebody else bought it before we did, because Bitcoin isn't as easy to get as you think. So having that monitoring, making sure you can respond to it, having programs in place is important, and then making sure your employees are trained and they understand what security awareness is, because who are our weakest points is usually the people that make mistakes. Make sure you have controls in place to mitigate that. I'm going to leave you with this. I talked about basics, and sometimes we have this us first them perspective or mentality. Anybody here, Army, Navy? Anybody? Army, Navy, or Army? Okay. So I love this concept called sing second. So an Army-Navy game is a big rivalry between both. It's the winner sings, the loser sings the winner's song, and it's a way to kind of bring camaraderie together. And I think in IT, we're always so us first them that I think we should have something like this, or maybe we're not singing because I can't sing worth a damn to save my life. But we should be more of working as a team, and I think this is a concept that we can learn from and be better from a pursuit of working better together, not just finger pointing all the time, sitting back and saying, how can we be better as security practitioners by getting to the basics before we address things like AI? And with that, thank you. I've got 4 minutes for questions. Thank you. If you want these slides, let me know. I'll get these to you. You don't have to take notes, please. All right, if there's no questions, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.